probably the same perception of people that are growing up 30 years from now when biotech is really freaking, there.
For me, I don't like that. I don't like that idea of just, oh, well, this is how we do it, so this is how you should do it. I want to know why. What's the purpose of doing it that way? Why do we need to do it that way?
I mean, if you don't ask those questions, you don't get innovations.
Yeah.
Like, they don't actually have that delayed gratification as much. They expect things to be quicker because things are quicker.
Previously, books were a very kind of status, expensive thing because it would all have to be done by hand.
Welcome to the Trans Boss podcast, home of the Trans Boss movement. The place where empowered trans people come to discover what it takes to become the best versions of themselves. I am your host, Javine, a Transfem trans empowerment specialist and the CEO of Javine, and I'm here to guide you on this empowering journey. In each episode, we'll dive deep into topics that matter to us trans people, like navigating through societal challenges, as well as building resilience and embracing an empowering mindset. We'll explore it all. We'll also bring on some incredible guests who are making a positive impact in the trans community. The Trans Boss podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, hope, wisdom, and epic stories from empowered trans bosses across the globe. It's time to kick life's ass and create an empowered, authentic you. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Okay, welcome to this episode. We are just sitting in the lounge room and we're discussing this perception around the, younger generations, like the Zoomers, the Alphas, and this perception that they are soft or, they don't know hard work like the older generations, yada, yada. And we're just having this really interesting conversation. I thought I'm going to hit record before we continue. So that's what this is. Where were we?
Okay, so talking about how it's not computer literacy because, the younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't have certain computer skills. When I went to school, we had a computer class, but it was learning some coding and looking at those kind of things. Previous generations to us had computer lab classes where they would literally look at how does a computer work? How do we get it to do the things we want it to do? Because in order to use a computer then, that's what you had to know.
Yeah.
And so younger generations now don't know how to troubleshoot a lot of computer issues without using the internet, which doesn't make them less smart, doesn't make them less capable. It just makes them different. I mean, a lot of those things I don't really know how to do either.
Yeah.
I know a bit because I've looked into it a little bit because I enjoy learning and stuff, but there's a lot of skills that I don't have, that I don't know, that I wasn't taught because they're not necessary anymore. Decades before we were born, you'd have to get ice delivered and you'd put it in your ice box so that you could keep your food fresh. Generations after that stopped didn't have to do that because of the invention of refrigerators.
Yeah.
Because that was the new way to keep your ice, to keep your food cold and preserved. And they didn't need to have those skills of how to move the ice, how to store it, all of that.
I mean, we're really talking about the perception of people that are growing up with different evolutionary advancements. Because a long time ago...
Technological advancements.
Well, yeah. Well, let's say when the lighter was invented and, you can make a fire really easily.
You don't need to know how to use flint and steel anymore.
Yeah, exactly. People would have stopped learning how to do that because now there's an easier way to do that. And I'm sure there would have been a perception back then of oh my gosh, this younger person doesn't know how to create a fire. That is consistent across any freaking time period and any generations. That perception is always there of you know, this generation has it so much easier because of XYZ.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing happening with the current generation, like, oh, the Gen Zs are soft or whatever, because they have the internet and they have access to things so much easier. It is easier in a lot of ways and it's harder in a lot of ways as well. But like that perception, the Gen Zs are going to have probably the same perception of people that are growing up 30 years from now when biotech is really freaking, you know, there.
But it's
because
not...
they will be like, oh, you know, back in our day we had to pick up our phone and type what we needed the answer to in Google.
I mean, that's
and
already
now
a
you just
thing.
think it.
We have smartphones, but what, 10, 15 years ago, it was all press the button 3 times to get that letter, go to a different button, press that button twice. The technology changing, and the faster technology changes, the more outdated old technology will be.
And it's happening quickly.
Yeah.
Like schools are pivoting now to teaching kids how to use AI to get their answers. And that'll so easily be, back in my day, I had to Google and go through all of these top pages that came up and had to get the answer myself. But now AI just looks at all those pages and gives you the answer so you don't have to work for it anymore.
But you look at
that's
how technology changes.
Yeah.
Who nowadays knows how to harness a horse, attach it to a cart, and ride that horse and cart? Who knows how to do that? Who would know how to drive one of the early cars? Who would know how to
I don't know how to drive a manual.
Working? Yeah, that's becoming obsolete technology.
Yeah.
In 10 years, maybe even in 5 years, maybe we'll have cars that are self-driving, that are actually working and not bypassing a lot of things and putting you in a risk of crashing and dying. Maybe we'll have that. At that point, when that technology becomes pervasive and is used everywhere, why would we teach people how to drive a car when it's not a skill they're using?
And then that perception between, like the perception difference between the older generation that had to do X, Y, Z and the younger generation that doesn't, I think is what a lot of people refer to. And like, what is, because you were saying that perception, you know, upsets you. Like, what was your wording?
It's really frustrating, and I really dislike this perception of, oh, this new generation has it so much easier. I had to work for my things. They're so soft. Because every generation has that thought. Every generation says those things about every new generation, about all of this new technology. And they always say, like, oh, it's making them soft, that they don't have to carry ice upstairs into their cold box, that they don't have to harness a horse, that they don't have to till a field by hand, that they don't have to do X, Y, Z. And no, we don't have to do that anymore, because technology changes. We're making innovations, we're making improvements. Wouldn't it be so much better to look at the new things and go, wow, like these innovations, this technology makes it so much better, gives people more time, or makes it so that they don't have to do as much hard labor as I had to do when I was young. That, like, these innovations are amazing. I think that would be a much better mindset.
Yeah. Couple of things. I think there's a difference between, because like the perception is often the fact that things are easier brings in certain things that have negative effects. So like when we're talking about, you know, not having to go to TV and watch a specific thing at a specific time and having an episode a week versus being able to binge watch something on Netflix, for example, there's a difference there between the delayed gratification and when we actually receive the dopamine reward for things. So older, and not even freaking older generations, like millennials and myself as a freaking Zoomer, I had that experience where it's like, okay, now I've got to wait for 7 p.m. on Saturday for, the next freaking episode to drop, and I have to watch it at that time. Otherwise, blah, blah, blah. Foxtel was like, awesome. I'm like, holy shit, I can record it. So then I can go back and watch it after. Like, all of those advancements are happening very, very quickly. But the difference in the delayed gratification versus the instant gratification, I think, is actually an interesting one to look at and an interesting thing to just be aware of. And that's not to say, oh, yeah, this is the reason why, the younger generations are soft, blah, blah, blah. It's just a factor to be aware of. And I think the younger generations actually do. Like, they don't actually have that delayed gratification as much. They expect things to be quicker because things are quicker.
Yeah.
And so when they're talking to older generations about things and they're sharing like frustrations, for example, that are reasonable frustrations to have in this day and age, the older generations are dismissing them and saying, oh, well, back in my day, I had to do blah, 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 blah. Like, those technology shifts are happening so rapidly now that that'll literally be like 5 years' time. You can say that. But there's another thing here as well. What you were saying about, like, wouldn't it be better if the perception was like, oh my gosh, this technology is so much better? That does exist. And like, I was at a, business mastermind event a little while ago that was all about AI. And this woman was doing a presentation, and she's probably like, I'd imagine she's late 50s, early 60s perhaps. And she was running this workshop on how to, prime ChatGPT to get, like all this marketing material and stuff like that. And she actually freaking broke down in tears while she was doing it. And she was like, it was so freaking sweet to see, because she was just reminiscing like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought that this kind of technology would be possible, that I would live to see this. Yeah. And she was so, so grateful. She was in tears and just saying to people like, embrace this technology, move with the times, because, it's such a gift that we get to experience this. And that was freaking beautiful. That was so beautiful.
And that reminds me of someone on TikTok. I don't remember their name, but they've talked about how, like 50 years ago, a computer was the size of like a studio apartment. They were massive, massive things, really inefficient.
Yeah.
Now we have it in our hand.
And they had enough power to run Snake.
Yeah, but now we have it in our hand.
Yeah.
How amazing is that?
It's incredible.
That in 50 years, we went from computers that you needed so much technical knowledge to run, that were massive, that only very specific places could have, to now everyone just has a computer in their hand.
Yeah.
But going back to what you were saying just before, about the instant gratification.
Yeah.
I think that conversation a lot of the time leads to a conversation of this new generation is so entitled because of that. And maybe they are. They probably are. But isn't every generation entitled? Doesn't every generation have their own area of entitlement?
Yeah.
You look at a lot of older generation people and they're entitled to good treatment or to respect or to get what they want when they go somewhere. Like they go to a restaurant and they say, I want this. And maybe the restaurant doesn't have that, and then they get really annoyed. There's that entitlement, but every generation is going to have that in some way.
And there
It
usually
doesn't-
is that perception of, oh, they don't know hard work. They're not, this or that anymore. And I think a lot of the younger generation understand more of what they want
Yeah.
because they're more... Like, I saw a TikTok the other day. It was a comedian that was making fun of, like, boomers and zoomers, essentially. And they were like, zoomers, or the younger generations, are so self-aware and they know so much more about themselves to just, like, this ridiculous level. Like, oh, I'm experiencing a pang of anxiety right now, or I can think that that's probably because of this that happened in my childhood, and oh, I know about the dissociation. I think I'm starting to dissociate and I need to do blah blah blah. And he was like going into really great detail about that, and kind of like making fun of it in a sense. And then also went to like the boomers and was like, now boomers, they don't know enough about themselves. They're like experiencing a certain emotion, and they just like, I'm feeling sad, and then it just turns to anger.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's a thing. And I think that's also an important aspect to think about, is the level of information that people have available to them now causes a whole bunch of things, like transgender, like information about transgender people and just their existence. The boomers think is causing more people to become transgender, which is obviously not the case. It's just that people have that awareness now and they know that it exists. And so more people are recognizing it earlier.
Yeah.
Because they have that information available to them. So I think it's the same kind of thing. And it's not better or worse. It's an aspect to be aware of. And all of those things are going to cause different perceptions.
Yeah. And going from that conversation of it's not better or worse, and the idea of older generations throughout history saying, oh, this new generation doesn't know hard work. There's documents, I'm fairly sure, going like ancient Greek documents talking about the new generation and the newest technology that was then, and saying, oh, they don't know hard work.
I think every generation takes advantage of and probably takes new technological advancements for granted.
Yeah, but
that's to be expected.
That's always been the conversation.
Yeah.
That the new generation doesn't know hard work. But there's a counterpoint to that where the older generation doesn't know what the hard work the newer generation is doing is. They don't know what that hard work is because it's not what they've experienced for their entire life. They haven't experienced that form of hard work.
Yeah.
And it's not easier, it's not harder than the previous hard work. It's just different. It might be less physically, like it might include less physical labor, so it might be less hard on your body physically, but it might be more mentally challenging. And how can we really say which of those is harder and which of those is tougher to do and which of those has more of an impact? There's so many different things and so much nuance that we can't know, that really I feel like every generation has hard work that people not of that generation just aren't going to really understand because it's not their norm.
I think the issue comes in when you're making blanket statements about it.
Yeah.
Because, oh, this generation has it so much easier. Yes, that is true. They also have it so much harder. I think two things can be true at the same freaking time. And a lot of people, like the older generations, consistently will delete and distort and generalize information, as humans do. We delete and distort, generalize everything. They will cater to their own perception of this was hard and what they have now is easy.
Yeah.
And that is natural. Like, that is a thing that happens. And I personally wouldn't say, it's not harder, it's not easier, it's just different. I personally wouldn't say that, because I think it's all of those things. It is harder, it is easier, it is different. And like, all of those things to me are true. Because even if we're looking at, oh my gosh, like starting a business nowadays is so much easier, because back in my day I had to go through the white pages and call every number and I had to go door knocking and blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, that is harder. It's a longer game, but it was also easier because there was so much less competition. You go and knock on someone's door and they haven't heard of your freaking particular, industry, product, whatever. It is so much easier to get a sale on that versus now being on the internet where 10 companies are all trying to get your attention for that one thing at the same time.
And you've got targeted ads that are...
Yeah. And get targeted ads, so much easier. You can target specific types of people with specific genders and specific locations with specific age ranges. You would think that that is so much easier. But when you have 100 freaking companies all targeting those same people for similar things, it's actually a lot harder as well. So like, you can't have a technological advancement and have it just be easier. It's also going to be harder. It's also going to be different. It also depends when you adopt that technology. Like, things will become obsolete and they'll become crowded, and that is the cycle of innovation. It'll always happen.
Technologies always bring in like new forms of work. Like, they replace
and new
old
issues.
forms of work that become obsolete, but they bring in new types of work that are needed to maintain that thing. Like,
to support the next advancement.
Yeah, like through history, you look at written text. Ages and ages ago, it would be like in Egypt on papyrus. And then there's, stone tablets and all of that. And in ancient Rome, you'd have people charge by the letter to engrave a stone tablet or whatever for shops or anything like that. And when books became more used, well, previously books were a very kind of status, expensive thing, because it would all have to be done by hand, and you'd have to be able to afford the paper and the binding and all of that. And it was a massive process to make a book. With the book press, you could make books a lot easier. But there were a lot of times
like printing press?
Not yet. I think,
right.
You'd have scribes, and basically you'd have people who would take a book and make a copy of it. Like the Bible. That was a really common thing, and that was how Bibles were copied, by hand, by scribes. And at that time, books were really only for the rich. But then you get the invention of like the printing press, and suddenly it becomes so much easier to mass produce books. And so everyone can have a book. It becomes much less of this status elite thing, and everyone can have that. And then with the invention of the computer, at first it was this more status thing that when the early computers were made, they were big, expensive, not everyone could have one. But now, everyone has a computer pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of how we read now. So from stone
books
tablets,
are slowly becoming obsolete as well.
Handwritten books to printed books to computer to
Kindle.
to like ebooks. The evolution of how we're writing and how we're reading has massively changed. I forget where I'm going. But it doesn't, like, it was more labor intensive probably to scribe a book or to engrave a tablet or whatever. But now it's really different. But writing a book, a lot of people will use a computer to write their book. And there's a lot of other different new thoughts that go into that haven't previously.
And each of those things come with pluses and minuses. Like, this whole conversation is honestly about duality.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding the light and the dark in everything, and knowing that, you know, this perception of, oh my gosh, the younger generation don't know real work, they're entitled, blah, 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 blah. Yes, so are the boomers.
Yeah.
And because there's that plus and minus in everything. The instant gratification that is available to the younger generations now has pluses and it has minuses. And when we're talking about entitlement specifically, I do think that that instant gratification does cause a level of entitlement, because younger generations expect things to happen quickly, because they do a lot of the time. And then what causes the entitlement frickin' percentage in boomers? A lot of that is probably due to their perception of younger generations and how they have this holier than thou, oh my gosh, we had to do blah, 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 blah in order to do this. And so therefore you should respect us and blah, blah, blah. We paved the way for you to get blah, blah, blah. And so there's this entitlement of them expecting respect and all of that. And like those, we're talking about the same thing, the entitlement, but it's come from two different things. And it's always present. Everything is always present.
And when you look at the idea of respect, you see that kind of teaching of respect your elders. And that's what was taught, and that's what is taught. But generations now are really asking the question, why should we respect someone if they're not showing us respect, and if they're not showing us that they're worth respecting?
Yeah. They're more aware of boundaries. They're like, work for it.
And that kind of change happens every generation. There's these old ideas, these old customs, old traditions that new generations will rebel against and will question. And that's good. That's how you get this change, this difference in culture, this difference in socialization. That's how you get all of these changes, by questioning things. And in my mind, you should question things. Because if you're not questioning them, then you're just accepting them because that's how things are done. And for me, I don't like that. I don't like that idea of just, oh, well, this is how we do it, so this is how you should do it. I want to know why. What's the purpose of doing it that way? Why do we need to do it that way?
I mean, if you don't ask those questions, you don't get innovations.
Yeah.
Like, you need to ask those things.
Yeah.
And that comes with being open to being wrong, or being open to there being a better way than you know. And I think a lot of older generation people aren't quite open to that.
Yeah, I see a lot
but
of
that's
the time,
another thing.
I see a lot of the time stories of younger generation people in work going to their bosses and saying, hey, why do we do it? Why do we do this thing this way? Doing it in another way would be a lot more beneficial.
I was that person. I was an 18-year-old in corporate HR. They were bringing in people through traineeships and apprenticeships to bring new blood into the government because the average age was about 50.
Yeah.
And so they'll bring all these young people in because they want new ideas and new ways of doing things and blah, blah, blah.
But when you come
Yet
with
every
an idea,
meeting I was in where they're like, this is how we're doing the thing, blah, 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 I would go, oh, I know, like, you know, this technological change would be able to do this much easier and be able to get this more accurate and blah, blah, blah.
but they don't
And
want
they would dismiss it and go, no, this has worked for 20 years. This is how we've always done it. I'm like, okay, well, why have you hired me?
Yeah, and that's why I think you should always be open to someone coming up and saying and asking you, why do we do it this way?
Yeah.
Wouldn't this way be more efficient?
Yeah.
Why are we doing X when Y would work better? Because even if it wouldn't work better and you know it wouldn't, couldn't you take the time to explain, oh, well, this is why we do it this way. This is why it works. And from my view, this is why what you're suggesting wouldn't work. Because maybe you're going to learn something. Maybe you're going to figure out a new way to do something that's more efficient, that's more beneficial, that helps people more, that saves more time, that whatever.
Doing that at the right time? Yes. Because if it's like, we have this deadline, this thing needs to happen, we know that this way works, and then there's like questioning of that and like, oh, let's fit. No.
Yeah.
Let's get this deadline. You can work on that over here and like, you know. But anyway, I think we need to start to wrap this up because we've spoken about a lot of freaking things. And I think, you know, this idea of the perception of certain generations and how we delete, distort, and generalize information is so freaking rampant. And every generation does it. And I do it with boomers. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're all like, you know, grumpy, entitled, freaking whatever. Like, I do that. I think every generation does that. And we need to be aware of how we're deleting, distorting, generalizing information and how we are, you know, not respecting the duality and thinking, oh, everything is this way or everything is that way. Like, everything is always present. So just remembering that there's light and dark in everything, I think helps us to be a lot more empathetic and helps us to be more open to new and different ideas. And my goodness, I mean, what else? How would you wrap this up?
I don't know. I think
it's a big conversation.
I think at the basis, it's just that every generation is going to be different. And just because they're different doesn't make them better or worse.
Yes.
It just makes them different. Some things might be better, some things might be worse. But overall, it's just a different generation who's grown up in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not better, it's not worse. It's all of those things. It's better, it's worse, it's different. And it always frickin' has been and always will be. So, yeah, I think that's a really good way to close this out. And that's what I mean when I'm saying, you know, respecting the duality of it as well. Respect every frickin' generation because they all have different hardships. They all have certain things that are easier. They all have certain things that are harder. And 20 years from now, people are going to look back at us and say how much easier we freaking had it too. Because that's the nature of how humans process information and how we create perceptions. So if we're aware of that, then we can perhaps counteract that a little bit and just freaking show kindness. Show kindness, show empathy, and just respect all round.
And don't make generalized statements saying that one generation is soft or not working hard.
And never make generalized statements because generalized statements are always bad. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this discussion as much as we are. We've been talking about this for a fair while. And we've only hit record like halfway through our talk. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I definitely have. It's been a pretty cool conversation. And what's that thing I say at the end? Go out there, do the things, live that freaking empowered life, that authentic life you always meant to live. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Trans Boss Podcast. If you support the Trans Boss movement, it would help immensely if you could leave a review on your favorite podcasting app, follow us, and share your biggest takeaway from this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at jasmine.vine on Instagram because I would love to see it. Now get out there, do the things, and take the next step into that empowered life you deserve. See you next time.